Have you ever heard of a place where there is no water beneath the ground, no clouds in the sky, and no sign of life? Only sand and more sand? Just imagine a vast region where nearly 500,000 acres of land disappear every year, silently, right before your eyes. This is not a movie, this is not fiction, this is real, and it is happening on our planet. If you want to discover a real story where the impossible was turned into possible, then subscribe to the channel and stay with us, because today's story won't just surprise you, it might change the way you think. The Kubuqi Desert in China. There was a time when this place wasn't just called a desert, people called it the Sea of Death. Because here, life meant only one thing, slowly disappearing. Endless waves of sand, scorching winds, and a strange silence, as if nature itself had declared, survival here is impossible. Do you know what was happening every year? Fertile land was farmland was being buried under sand. Entire villages were wiped out. People were forced to abandon their homes. This wasn't just a desert, it was a slowly spreading disaster. There's a name for this process, desertification. In simple terms, places that once supported life gradually turn into desert. And Kubuqi was one of the most extreme examples of this crisis. But the most frightening part? The desert was not stopping. Every day, every year, it kept expanding. Homes, roads, farmlands, everything was slowly being consumed. Did China just sit back and watch? No, they tried many times. Trees were planted, sand control stations were built, massive projects were launched, billions were invested. But the result? Almost zero. It felt like they were losing this battle, because deserts follow a terrifying rule. Once they begin to expand, stopping them is nearly impossible. The wind carries sand across the land, dries out the soil, and before any new plant can grow, it's gone. And then, a man stepped forward. His idea was so unusual that people laughed when they first heard it. His name, Wang Wenbiao. Do you know what he wanted to do? He decided to stop the desert. It sounds simple, but in reality, it was madness. So what did he do? He spent all his savings. He took loans, brought in over 100 bulldozers, hired 300 workers. Work began 18 hours a day. But the method was strange. He started creating small square grids on the desert sand, using dry shrubs. Then, inside those squares, he began planting trees. Do you know what kind of tree? Willow trees. These are not ordinary trees. Their roots can reach as deep as 300 feet underground, which means they can survive where almost nothing else can. But the challenge didn't end there. The desert winds were so powerful that young plants died before they could grow. The wind didn't just move sand, it also dried out what little moisture existed in the soil. So Wang used another strategy. He surrounded the area with shrubs, so that the wind couldn't hit directly and moisture could be preserved inside. This small idea slowly began creating a big change. But people were still laughing. This man is crazy, planting trees in a desert? But he didn't stop. Not for a day, not for a week, but for years. Slowly, some trees survived. Some roots grew deeper. The sand began to settle. It started to feel like the impossible was becoming possible. But then, another major problem appeared. Planting trees was difficult, but keeping them alive was even harder. Because they needed regular care, their new shoots had to be trimmed, otherwise the trees wouldn't grow strong. And in a desert this vast, doing this manually was nearly impossible. With human labor, the cost was too high, the time endless, and the effort overwhelming. So the question became, who would manage this system? Who would handle such delicate work? Across such a massive desert? And right here, the story takes an unbelievable turn. A solution was coming, one no one had ever imagined. A partner, not human, but capable of doing even more than humans. Just when it seemed like this battle could go no further, the story took a turn that was not only surprising, but truly transformative. Because Wang realized something important. Humans alone could not win this fight. It wasn't about fighting against nature, but working with it. But the question was, how? And this is where the strange, unbelievable, yet effective solution appears. The task that thousands of people struggled to do was handed over to a small animal, rabbits. Yes, it may sound surprising. Rabbits to stop a desert? But these were not ordinary rabbits. They were a special breed, Rex rabbits, often called white gold, because their fur is so soft, so valuable, that in the international market, a high-quality pelt can sell for up to $30. And the cost to raise one? Just around $2. So economically, this was a remarkable opportunity. But the real story isn't just about money. The real secret lies in their behavior. Rex rabbits have a unique habit. They love eating the young, tender shoots of willow trees. And when these rabbits began feeding on those new shoots, something incredible happened. When the soft new branches were trimmed, the main trunk of the tree grew stronger, thicker, more resilient. Exactly the same task that humans had to do manually, with time and effort, was now being done naturally by these small creatures. It meant nature had started doing its own work. But the story doesn't end here. Another major contribution of these rabbits was their waste. As strange as it may sound, their droppings became a powerful natural fertilizer for the desert soil. That dry, lifeless, dead ground slowly began to regain its nutrients. There was something even more fascinating. When these rabbits ate grass, they couldn't fully digest the seeds. As a result, those seeds returned to the soil. And after some time, something incredible was noticed. Where there was once only sand, tiny patches of grass began to grow. It created a small but powerful cycle. The trees held the soil in place, the rabbits strengthened the trees, their waste enriched the soil, grass began to grow, and that grass was eaten again. Nature and animals started working together. Slowly, the movement of the sand began to slow down. The wind could no longer carry it away like before. Moisture started to remain in the soil, and within just a few years, an impossible sight emerged. The place once known as the Sea of Death was turning green. But the transformation didn't stop with the environment. It spread into people's lives. Local communities were encouraged to raise rabbits. Small families began building farms right in their own homes. Rabbit fur started being sold. Raw materials began coming from the trees. People started earning again. Those who had once left this land slowly began to return. This wasn't just a desert turning green. An entire society was coming back to life. But Wang didn't stop there. He understood that to make this transformation sustainable, technology had to be part of it. And this is where one of the most astonishing parts of the story begins. In the middle of the desert, a massive solar power plant was built. Made up of 196,000 solar panels, designed in the shape of a galloping horse, a breathtaking structure. But it wasn't just visually incredible, its capacity was just as remarkable. This plant produces around 2.3 billion kilowatt-hours of electricity every year, enough to power nearly 400,000 people. But there's a twist. These panels don't just generate electricity. They reduce wind speed by nearly 50%, and beneath them, they create shade, protecting the ground from direct sunlight. And under that shade, grass begins to grow again, and where there is grass, rabbits, sheep, and ducks return. A completely new ecosystem is formed. Technology and nature working together. This is not just a project. This is a new model. A model where humans do not try to control nature, but work with it. And today, this model is no longer limited to China. Spain, various countries in Africa, many regions in the Middle East are beginning to follow this approach. Because they have realized you cannot win by fighting against nature. But if you understand it and work with it, even the impossible becomes possible. But the most important lesson of this story is still ahead. Why was Wang called crazy at first? Why do people struggle to believe new ideas? And how can a single idea change the way the world thinks? The answers lie in the final part of this story. A story that began with a sea of sand and death has now reached a place where humans didn't just restore nature, they built a future. When the transformation of the Kabuki Desert became clearly visible, it was no longer just an environmental project. It became a living example of what is possible when humans, animals, and technology work together. Gradually, governments, scientists, and international researchers began studying this model. Why did it work? How did a dead ecosystem come back to life? The answer is not complicated, but it is profound. Because this was not a fight against nature. This was collaboration with nature. Before, people believed a desert was a problem that had to be forced into stopping. But Wang Wenbiao showed a desert is also a system with its own rules. And if you understand those rules, you can change it. In this project, 3 elements work together: trees, animals, and technology. And through their combination, a new world was created. Where wind once symbolized destruction, it now generates energy. Where sand once buried everything, now green trees hold the soil in place. Where people once fled, they are now returning to build new lives. But perhaps the most remarkable part of this story is it didn't stop at Kabuki. Today, this model is being used in different parts of the world. In the Sahara region of Africa, in the dry lands of the Middle East, even in parts of Europe, this same approach is being tested. Because the problem is the same: desertification. Every year, vast areas of the planet are turning from fertile land into desert. According to United Nations reports, millions of people are at risk of losing their homes because of this crisis. But Kabuki has shown it can be stopped. This is not just a story, it is a solution. And that brings us to the most important question: can we learn from this? Because we already have the technology, we have the knowledge, and nature is on our side. All we need is the right mindset. But the story doesn't end here. Because behind every great change, there is a difficult truth. At first, no one believes it. When Wang started, people called him crazy. When he planted trees in the desert, people laughed. When he introduced rabbits, people thought it was a joke. But today, those same people are coming to learn this model. That's reality. When you start something new, no one believes you at first. If you fail, people will say, "I told you so." But if you succeed, those same people will say, "I knew you could do it." This story is not just about transforming a desert. It is about the human mindset. It is about an idea that once seemed impossible and today has become reality. Now imagine one final scene, a place that was once nothing but sand, burning winds, and silent death.